Jennifer Lechner wants to know, the big bankrupt lie, there is a Social Security trust fund, and if any big lie takes down this country, it's this one. All the rest are just nuisances. Look, the short form on this is when Social Security sold to the American people, it wasn't a handout, because when it was, even as late as it was when it started, I want to say it was in the 60s, wasn't it? Part of the Johnson programs. But when Social Security was introduced, I want to say 64, 66, somewhere in there, America was a lot more conservative than it was then, and Americans weren't looking for a handout. And the way Social Security was sold was, it was said, look, we're not taxing you and then giving you benefits. It's a retirement program. You're basically paying into a fund. And that was the belief for decades, that this Social Security check that I'm going to get at the end of my life is not a government handout. It's in fact money that the government took from me. It's my money. They took it. They've been holding it. And that's how it was sold. So imagine what happened. And imagine what happened in the world of American politics, especially in progressive politics. But it's not fair to blame it just on them, because Republicans have been in power both in the Congress and in the White House on and off during the entire time the chicanery's gone on, so they're just as guilty as anybody else. What happened is you start collecting money from people. You've got a big base. Everybody's paying in. Very few people are receiving payments. A lot of workers, high birth rate, young people coming in much faster than old people are retiring. So you have a giant pot of cash, billions and then trillions of dollars. I'm told it was starting in 1934. I'm not sure it was ratified that early, but in any event, Brad Hope said it started earlier. Whatever the start date, doesn't really matter. Because as it took in money into this account, which was an account that you're going to pay into and then be paid back out of, it's just a holding account. You have a big pot of money sitting there. And a big pot of money is not something that politicians have the power to resist. It's the precious, right? A big pot of money is the precious. It allows them to be big men and big women now, and to show up in the neighborhoods and bring home the bacon and hand out the largesse and buy some more votes so they can get reelected and ride in the big airplanes and ride in limousines and be called my good friend, the great gentleman from the honorable gentleman from the great state of this. Hillary Clinton hasn't driven a car in 20 years. You know why? It's because she works for the government. She doesn't have to drive a car. She has people to do that. And so what they realized was, well, here's a big pot of money that's doing no good other than simply, making interest and being held in trust in terms of living up to our promises, but that doesn't mean anything to these people. So they went in, they saw this big pot of money, and they started spending it. And then they spent all the big pot of money. And now the big pot of money's gone. And now as more and more people who've been paying into that big pot of money for 30 years say, I want my money, well, it's not here anymore. Well, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to print more money to make up for the big pot of money that we spent on stuff other than what we were supposed to spend it on. Any questions? It was stolen, just like everything else. Stolen. What else do you call it? When money is set aside in a drawer, or in the words of Al Gore, a lockbox, for a specific purpose, I'm putting this money away for my retirement fund. Right? Right, government? You're taking it from me, and I'm feeling it. It hurts. You're going to take the money, and it's going into an account, right? So when I need it back at the end of my career, I get it back, right? You're going to hold on to it, right? Oh, yeah. Well, where is it? Well, we actually spend it on stuff. It's theft. It's larceny. It's actionable. You should be in prison. All of you should all be in prison. Okay? Boom. There it is. So that's the situation. Now what do? We don't have any money. Now it's broken. Now, as it turns out, it will bankrupt the country. But here's what's interesting about Social Security. Social Security is it's probably the best example of something in terms of thinking about a problem in a different way. For example, here's the way it works. We don't have a declining population yet, but certainly our birth rate is way down over what it was. So we have a couple of different problems. Number one, they stole the money. Number two, we don't have as many children as we used to relative to old people, which means that it's getting top heavy. Fewer people are coming in at the bottom, more people going out at the top. That's bad. And there's a third problem. And that third problem is if you used to retire at 65 in 1966, let's say, if you retired at 65, you might live another 4 or 5 years, get your heart attack at 68 or 69, and off you go. You're off the rolls. You don't have to be paid anymore. Retirement used to be 5 years, 10 years before you died. Nowadays, you're still retiring at 65, but you're living to be 80, 90. It's 20 years, 30 years in some cases. So not only was the money stolen, and not only is the base smaller than it used to be compared to the tip of this Ponzi scheme, basically, is what it is, But also, the amount of money that we have to pay over time is much greater because people are living a lot longer. So there are two ways to fix this. One way is to raise taxes and increase the revenues. Don't change anything, but increase the revenues. Put more money. You got to teeter-totter, right? You got to swing a seesaw. And you've got expenses here and revenues here. So what you want to do is you want to increase the revenues, bring the revenues up, bring tax, and it gets to be a little more in balance and it's in the black. But it costs a fortune, an incredible increase in taxes to do that. But what's interesting about this whole thing is, if you think outside of the box and you've got this thing in balance, it's true, you can either raise revenues and balance it that way, or you can move the fulcrum. You can move the balance point. And what you find in physics and also in economics is a very, 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 very small shift in the fulcrum, in the balance point, has enormous effects way out on the extremes where you get into revenues and expenses. A very big extreme. So here's how easy it is. Right now, if I was president of the United States, right now, I would say, folks, I tell people what was broken and why. We're out of money, and we're not making enough of it, and we're not going to raise taxes because we've already got enough taxes. We already have enough regulations. Here's the problem. We don't have enough money. Here's how we solve the problem. Starting now, I'm sorry about this, or I think I've actually heard it better than this. For those of you who are going to retire in 10 years, we made you a promise, and you're going to retire at 65. If you're more than 10 years out but less than 20, you have to go to 66. If you're more than 20 years away from retirement, you have to work to your 67. This is not a big burden on our society at all. We keep the promise of the people who are closest. The people a little further away have to add another year. The people who are considerably further away have to add 2 years. You've got plenty of time to think it over. If you move that fulcrum like that, the next 10 years, 65, 10 to 20, 66, 20 on, 67, Social Security is in the black again. It's in the black again. It's that simple. And frankly, folks, if you want to know whether I would rather work to 67 till I retire and then live to be 97 versus retire at 65 and die at 69, it's not a tough one for me. It's part of the price of living in a more successful society based on medicine and those big pharma companies that have taken all the money. It's a simple thing to sell to the American people. Now, is there a little bit of pain in this? Yes, I suppose. If you're 54 years old and you are looking forward to retiring at 65 and you're 54 and your heart is set on retiring at 65, well, you're going to have to wait another year and retire at 66. If you're 35 years old and you are or 45 years old rather, and just dying to retire on the day of your 65th birthday, well, guess what? You have to wait another 2 years. This is not an unmanageable solution to the problem. It's a simple solution to the problem. We all bear it equally. There is one fault line in here, and this is just tough. It's just tough. There's nothing I can just say. It's just too bad for you. If you make a dividing line there, right, between if you're 10 years out from retirement, you're okay at 65, 10 to 20, you're out at 66, 20 on, you're out at 67, then there are going to be people that are 1 day away from that dividing line. You are going to find thousands of people whose birthdays line up in such a way that if they'd been born 1 day earlier, they would have been able to get out at 65, but no, now they have to get out at 66. Or 2 days earlier, or 5 or 20 or whatever. That line is going to be there, and I'm sorry to say, too bad for you. There's no other way to do it. Too bad for you. So, problem solved. Pretty simple, really.